The command came through clear, no interference, no delay. Turn back immediately. Every aircraft in range acknowledged it within seconds. Every system confirmed compliance. Except one. Her signal didn't change direction, not even slightly. And for a moment, it looked like she had just made the worst decision of her career. If you've ever known turning back wasn't the right move, type keep going below. The airspace had been active for long enough that everyone inside it understood the shape of the situation. Multiple aircraft operating across overlapping corridors, each one holding its assigned position and function within the broader operational structure, the kind of coordinated complexity that requires continuous calibration, continuous communication, and the continuous, distributed trust that everyone in the space is doing their designated part correctly. The mission had been running according to its design parameters, and the design parameters had been handling the situation as intended. Then the situation changed. That was the operational reality that the command network was responding to a development in the ground environment that had shifted the risk calculus for the aircraft in the operational area, that had produced the assessment that continued presence in the zone represented exposure that the mission's remaining objectives did not justify. The logic was sound. The assessment had been made by people with access to a broader picture of the evolving threat environment than any individual pilot in the space could hold simultaneously, and the conclusion they had reached was the conclusion that the available information supported. The order went out cleanly. Turn back immediately. The compliance was nearly instantaneous. Pilots who had been oriented toward the operational area began the process of reorientation with the disciplined efficiency of professionals responding to a clear instruction through a clear channel. Systems that had been tracking forward began tracking the egress corridors that would take each aircraft out of the zone and into the airspace where the threat assessment returned to acceptable. The network of signals that had been a picture of presence and purpose in the operational area began rapidly and systematically to become a picture of withdrawal. She received the order. She did not respond to it, not immediately. Her signal visible on every display that was tracking the operational area, identifiable by the call sign and the flight profile that the mission had assigned her, maintained its heading without deviation. The direction didn't change. The speed didn't change. The altitude didn't change. Where every other signal in the area was in the early stage of its withdrawal arc, hers was a straight line, still pointed at the zone everyone else was leaving. The first interpretation was the obvious one, a communications failure, a gap in the channel. A momentary dropout that had prevented the order from reaching her system in the clean, complete form that would have produced the expected response. The protocol for that was straightforward, and it was already in motion: confirmation of the order, redundant transmission, direct channel contact. She wasn't looking at the order. She was looking at the gap in the data that the order, at the moment it was issued, had not accounted for. A specific piece of the operational picture, a ground element whose status in the withdrawal sequence was showing a reading that didn't match the clean, completed picture the command network was operating against. Small, specific, easily missed inside the broader data environment of an active operational situation, the kind of detail that disappears inside the signal-to-noise ratio of a complex operational picture unless someone happens to be looking at exactly the right feed at exactly the right moment. She had been looking at exactly the right feed, and the order to turn back had arrived before its implications had been transmitted up the chain, before the piece of the picture she was holding had made it to the people who needed it to make the picture complete. The order was correct given what command knew. What command knew was not everything there was to know. She flew the heading for another few seconds before the weight of the decision fully assembled itself. It wasn't a complicated calculation in its components. The components were clear enough. Turn back. Correct the violation of a direct order. Preserve the safety margin the command's assessment had determined the situation required. Accept that whatever the ground data was showing would be handled by the resources available to handle it, which at this moment did not include her. Continue. Maintain the one thread of awareness the operational picture currently held that the command network didn't act on the ground element status before the window that status implied closed. Accept the professional and physical consequences of being the signal that didn't comply. The complication was in the weight assigned to each side. The order had been issued by people who understood the situation better than any individual element within it. That was the premise on which the entire operational structure rested, and it wasn't a premise she disputed. Command had more information than she did. Command had the full picture assessment. Command had made a decision that reflected the sum of everything visible to the people responsible for making it. But she had one piece they didn't. Not because she was smarter or more capable or positioned to see something the command network was structurally incapable of seeing. Because she was in the right physical location, at the right moment, looking at the right data feed, and the ground element status had updated 15 seconds before the withdrawal order was issued, which meant the command network's picture of the withdrawal's completeness was 15 seconds behind the reality she was reading. 15 seconds is nothing in most contexts. In this one, it was the difference between a withdrawal that closed cleanly and one that left a piece of itself behind. The hardest choice isn't between safe and dangerous, it's between what you're told and what you know is still unfinished. If you've ever gone against the easy option type "not done below," she didn't transmit her decision. There was no announcement, no explanation pushed into the channel that would have forced the command network to process an argument it didn't have time to evaluate. The explanation would come after if the result justified it, and if she was in a position to give it. Right now, the only communication that mattered was the one already happening between her aircraft and the airspace in front of her. She held the heading, not the reckless forward motion of someone who has decided rules don't apply to her, the controlled, deliberate continuation of a flight path toward a specific objective that had been identified and assessed and determined to require her presence for a window that was narrowing with every second she spent considering the alternatives. She didn't accelerate dramatically. She adjusted slightly, tightened the approach, reduced the margin she was carrying at altitude, configured the aircraft for the kind of entry that minimized her exposure, while maximizing the precision of what she was about to do, not charging in, going in with intention. The difference between those two things was everything in the next 90 seconds. The entry into the hot zone happened without announcement. She came in low and fast along the approach vector that the terrain dictated, keeping the geography between herself and the threat axis that the data had mapped not perfectly, not with the theoretical precision of a simulation, but with the practical precision of someone who has converted a plan into a physical reality and is adjusting the conversion in real time as the environment provides new information. She did not engage directly. That was the first decision, and in many ways the most important one, the decision that defined the difference between what she was doing and what a less precise intervention would have looked like. Direct engagement with the threat elements in the area would have drawn resources toward her, concentrated attention on her position, and produced the kind of symmetric exchange that costs more than it resolves. She wasn't there to fight. She was there to change the shape of the fight that was already happening. The threat coverage in the zone had a geometry. Every defended position has the arrangement of threat elements that produces overlapping coverage of the spaces the ground element would need to move through to extract. The geometry was the problem. Break it, and extraction became possible. Leave it intact, and the ground element's options were what they had been for the preceding several minutes. Inadequate. She found the critical angle, not the most dangerous threat element, not the one that represented the largest individual risk to her aircraft, but the one whose position was the load-bearing piece of the coverage geometry, the element whose removal or suppression would create the gap that the ground element could use. The distinction between those things is the distinction between applied force and applied understanding, between fighting toward resolution and thinking toward it. She hit the angle. The response from the threat environment was immediate, which was expected. Her presence in the zone had already changed the distribution of attention in a way that was creating the effect she needed even before the specific engagement resolved. The ground element, which had been holding a position that had no viable egress, felt the pressure on one of its flanks reduce with the abruptness of something structural changing. Movement became possible. Not easy, not the clean, uncontested extraction that a fully coordinated withdrawal in ideal conditions produces, but possible in the specific, narrow sense that matters when the alternative is no movement at all. A gap in the coverage geometry that had been closed was now open, briefly and impermanently, for exactly as long as it would take the ground element to use it. Meanwhile, the command network had found the 15-second gap in its data. The ground element's status, correctly updated, had surfaced through the operational channels with the clean urgency of a piece of information that changes the picture it's added to. The picture had changed. The assessment that had produced the withdrawal order had been built on a picture that was now confirmed to be incomplete, and the network was processing the updated version with the rapid reconfiguration of a system receiving a correction. She had already been inside the zone for 40 seconds. She didn't stay to consolidate. She didn't press beyond what the situation required, didn't extend her presence in the area past the point where the specific objective, the gap, the ground element's window had been served. She had come for one thing and done one thing, and the operational logic of her entry did not include anything beyond it. The ground element moved through the gap. The timing was what it had to be: close, compressed, with less margin than any planning document would have prescribed as acceptable. The kind of timing that results from a situation where the available window and the required action were matched with precision rather than comfortable excess. There was no room for hesitation inside it and no room for error, and the ground element moved with the focused, committed efficiency of people who understood that the window they were inside had a closing time, and that closing time was not negotiable. The extraction completed. She turned. Her signal, which had been the one anomaly in a picture of uniform compliance, began its arc back toward the egress corridor, moving in the direction the order had specified, belatedly and without apology, carrying a result that the order's compliance would have prevented. The zone settled without spectacle. No explosion that marked a dramatic conclusion. No visible, definitive moment where the thing that had been in danger was visibly, unambiguously safe. The operational picture simply updated to a state where the variables that had been wrong were no longer wrong, the ground element status moving from the reading that had represented a problem to the reading that represented resolution, command noted it. Not loudly, the channel that had issued the withdrawal order did not produce a counter-communication that addressed what had just happened, did not formally acknowledge the deviation or formally acknowledge the outcome it had produced. The operational record would document the sequence accurately: the order, the non-compliance, the result, and the evaluation of the relationship between those three things would happen through whatever process the command structure used to make sense of situations where the data and the decision and the outcome didn't map cleanly onto the standard frameworks. She didn't preempt that process. She didn't transmit a report during the egress, didn't push an explanation into the channel ahead of whatever inquiry the deviation was going to generate. The explanation existed in the data, in the updated ground element status, in the timing of the extraction relative to the timing of her entry, in the relationship between the coverage geometry she had disrupted and the window that had opened. Anyone looking at the full sequence would understand it. She trusted that. She cleared the operational area and returned to the designated egress corridor without drama, her aircraft moving through the airspace with the same professional economy it had brought to every other phase of the mission. The anomaly her signal had represented in the withdrawal picture was over. She was where the order had told her to be, moving in the direction the order had specified, just later, and carrying a ground element that would have been absent from the count if the order had been the last word on the situation, present in the final tally because one signal had remained straight when every other had turned, not out of defiance, not out of the belief that the order was wrong, but out of the specific, narrow, time-limited knowledge that the order had been built on an incomplete picture and that the window to complete it was closing. Following orders keeps you safe, but understanding the moment keeps others alive. The real courage isn't ignoring commands, it's knowing when they don't see the full picture, and acting on that knowledge cleanly, precisely, without the dramatic announcement that would turn a tactical correction into something about yourself rather than something about the people who needed it. She had not made it about herself. She had made it about the 15 seconds nobody else had seen. Subscribe to Steelheart Stories, Emma, for more stories where the right decision isn't always the obvious one.